I worked the counter at the wayside table for 11 years before I ever set a plate down for a dragon, and I want to say I thought it through, but the truth is simpler than that. It was closing time on a Tuesday, the highway empty in both directions, and something the size of a delivery truck was standing at the edge of my gravel lot, with its head low and its ribs showing through cracked grayscale. I didn't think. I just carried out the meatloaf nobody had ordered and set it on the ground the way you'd set food down for a dog that had been kicked too many times to trust a hand held flat. He didn't come close that night. He watched me from 20 feet off, one wing hanging wrong against his side, healed crooked the way a bone heals when nobody sets it. Then, when I'd gone back inside and only half turned to watch through the screen door, he ate. The regulars started calling him Old Cinder before the week was out, on account of the soot-dark color of him and the way he moved like a man dragging a bad hip. They weren't cruel about it, not most of them. Ted Boylan just found it funny, a monster the size of a house too broken to be scary. Kids from the trailer park down the road would come stand at the fence and throw gravel to see if he'd flinch. He always flinched. He never once showed a tooth for it. I fed him anyway. Every night, whatever was going to spoil by morning, end of shift eggs, the fatty trim off the griddle, once a whole pan of biscuits gone hard. I never said much to him. I'm not sure what you'd say, but I got so I'd talk while I worked the register, just ordinary complaining, the price of coffee filters, my knees, my sister's husband who never called. He'd lie out there in the lot with his head on his forearms and those slit yellow eyes half closed, and I came to believe, the way you believe things you can't prove, that he was listening. It went on that way most of a summer. He never came inside, never took a scrap from anyone's hand but mine, and even then, only off the ground, like touching me, might cost me something he wasn't willing to spend. Up close, on the nights he let me get close, I could see the old wound along his shoulder, where the wing had been torn near off and healed wrong, and a paler ring of scale, circling one foreleg, like something had once been clamped there a long time. There was a night in July I remember clear. A bad storm had come through, the kind that flattens the wheat and takes down a power line or two, and I found him the next morning, pressed up against the propane tank on the diner's east side. That crooked wing curled around himself tight as a man holding a bad rib. I didn't touch him. I'd learned that much by then. I just dragged a chair out and sat with the radio going low through the open door, some AM station out of Lubbock, and let him have the company of another living thing without asking anything of him for it. He didn't move the whole hour I sat there, but when I finally stood to go start the coffee, he lifted his head and watched me all the way to the door, and something in the set of him had eased, the way a man's shoulders drop when he realizes nobody's going to make him explain himself. Ted Boylan stopped calling him Old Cinder around then too, though he never said why. He just started leaving his own scraps by the fence on his way out, quiet, like a man paying down a debt he hadn't known he owed. The trouble came from Hoyt Dunmore, who ran cattle 2 miles east and had lost a heifer that spring to something he never proved was cinder, but decided to blame anyway. Hoyt showed up one evening in his truck with 2 other men and a chain long enough to hitch a house, talking about a fella in Amarillo who'd pay good money to put a real live dragon on a platform and charge admission, and if the thing wouldn't go easy, there was always the rifle in his gun rack. I walked out from behind that counter faster than my knees had let me move in years, and stood between Hoyt's truck and the dark shape lying in my gravel lot. "He eats off my property," I said. "That makes him mine to feed, and mine to ask you to leave alone." Hoyt laughed, not unkindly, the way men laugh at a woman they've decided isn't serious. "Marlene, that thing's not a stray cat." "No," I said, "but he's not causing you trouble either, and you don't have one shred of proof he touched your heifer. So you can turn that truck around, or you can explain to the sheriff why you drove 2 miles to threaten a crippled animal that's never so much as bared a tooth. I didn't have a gun on me. I want that understood. I had a coffee pot in one hand, still hot, because I'd walked out mid-pour, and that was the whole of my arsenal. But something in my face must have carried more weight than I knew it did, because after a long, ugly quiet, Hoyt spat in the gravel and got back in his truck, and the other two went with him. Behind me, I heard the dragon move for the first time in weeks. A low sound, not quite a growl, more like a breath let out after being held a long time. That was the last easy night. 3 days later, past midnight, I woke to a sound like a hard rain that wasn't rain, and when I got the porch light on, I understood why. The sky over the diner was full of wings, 6 of them, maybe 8, dropping down out of the dark in a slow circle, each one bigger and darker and more sure of itself than the shape I'd fed all summer, and I stood on my own back step in my nightgown with my heart going like a rabbit's, waiting to find out whether kindness had gotten me killed after all. They didn't come for me. They landed around him, careful, the way you'd gather around a man in a hospital bed, and the biggest of them, a long-scaled female with a crest like a crown of bone, lowered her head to his and made a sound low enough that I felt it in my chest more than heard it. I found out the rest of it slow, over the following hour, from a young one of the group who'd learned enough of our speech somewhere to manage it plain, halting, but clear. The old bull's name was Vero. He'd been warden of the Kelthir Reach once, first shield of the whole Dominion, until a border skirmish years back had left him wing-torn and carrying a wasting rot in his blood that no healer among them could draw out clean. Rather than risk it spreading through the nesting grounds, he'd flown himself out past the border and grounded there, alone, meaning never to go back. The rot had finally burned itself out in him a season back, but by then, he'd been gone so long, and shamed so thoroughly by his own choosing, that he hadn't believed there was a home left to return to. We could not find him, the young one said. A grief that deep does not show, but these last months, something in him began to answer again. Warmth, where there had only been silence. We followed that. I looked at Vero lying there in my gravel lot with 6 of his own kind around him, that crooked wing catching the porch light, and I understood, finally, what I'd been feeding all summer wasn't just a stray. It was a man, because that's the only word I have for what dignity looks like in a creature that size, waiting to find out if he still deserved to be found. He didn't fly off with them that first night. He stayed until near dawn, and before the others rose to go, he came to the porch steps, slow on that bad hip, and lowered his great scarred head until it was level with mine. He didn't kneel. I want to be clear about that. Nothing about him bent or gave. He just held still a long moment, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him, and set one clawed foot down on the bottom step, and left there a stone the size of my fist, smooth and dark, polished by some hand or claw, a very long time. Then he went up with the rest of them into a sky, just starting to go gray at the edges, and I stood on my step in my nightgown until I couldn't tell his shape from the others anymore. I still have that stone. It sits by the register, where the regulars ask about it, and I tell them what I feel like telling. I never got his name until the night he was already leaving, and I never saw him again after, though every so often, on a slow night with the highway empty both ways, I catch myself listening for something heavier than wind. I still set an extra plate sometimes, when the eggs are going to spoil anyway. Habit, I tell myself. But I think some part of me is still hoping pride, wherever it's gone to heal, might come back hungry again.